Welcome to the Hub Podcast. My name is Eric Berger, Marketing Communications Manager for VolunteerHub, an organization that helps nonprofits better recruit, engage, and manage volunteers. Today, I have the privilege of speaking with Donna Martin, Volunteer Service Manager at Boys and Girls Clubs of the Valley. Hey, Donna, how are you today?
Hey, Eric, it's good to talk with you. Thanks for inviting me in.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time. So, to get started, I just wanted to talk about your role, what all it entails. What does a volunteer service manager do?
Well, that's a great question. So in our organization, the volunteer service manager oversees, manages, directs all of the volunteers across the organization. So we currently have 31 locations, and last year we had a little over 1,000 volunteers. So we're still in a dip from the pandemic. It's a slow comeback, but we're getting there. And not just the club volunteers, but also helping with volunteers for special events, volunteers out in the community. We're sometimes tapped to support other organizations. So my job is to make sure we've got the volunteer manpower we need, people that can meet the needs we've identified, that they have the skills and the talents and the expertise that we're looking for, and can pass the background check. So it keeps me busy, I got to tell you.
I bet. And you guys just went through a big change. Now you're used to be multiple Boys and Girls Clubs, and now you fall under Boys and Girls Clubs of the Valley. Can you explain that transition? And then also, for those that don't know, what Boys and Girls Club does, the mission, and just kind of what is the impact thus far of your organization?
In 2020, we had a significant merger between two Boys and Girls Clubs organizations in Maricopa County out here in Arizona. We had Boys and Girls Clubs of the East Valley and Boys and Girls Clubs of Metro Phoenix merge. And overnight, we doubled in size, which is kind of cool when you think about it. We doubled the number of kids we could serve. We also doubled the number of locations. Our staffing increased. It was really an exciting adventure. And then in February, the pandemic hit. So it was an interesting time of being nimble and scrambling quickly and meeting the needs of the organization and the members and trying to be responsive to our volunteers as well. The cool thing about the merger was we already had the same shared mission, vision, and values. So that really helped us out. If you think about PTAs or maybe the Girl Scouts, they have an overarching national organization, and then they have independent units. And Boys and Girls Clubs of America is very similar. So we pay a membership fee to belong to Boys and Girls Club of America. And with that comes certain requirements to meet policies, particular practices, membership requirements, some programmatic things that we have to do so that we can use the Boys and Girls Club name. And then here in Arizona, we have an alliance of independent Boys and Girls Clubs, of which we are one. And under our umbrella of Boys and Girls Clubs of the Valley, we run 31 sites, most of Maricopa County, part of Pinell County. And then I love saying we're now in Yuma, which is a 3-hour drive. So we're expanding our footprint. And with that, we're also expanding the kids that we serve. So our mission for quite a while has remained the same, and it's still vital today, where we empower young people, especially those that need us most, to reach their full potential as productive, caring, responsible members of the community. And our vision is still valid today. We strive to become that premier out-of-school time provider for the kids in Arizona. I used to say we provided a safe place after school, and we still do that, and we do that well. But since the pandemic, we've also noticed that kids' needs have changed, and we're striving to meet their needs for social emotional support and social emotional intelligence. And to that end, we launched a new program earlier this year where we are partnering with a local mental health agency, and we're bringing behavioral therapists right into the clubs to work with members and their families. We're quite proud of this initiative. And it's really been helpful because that allows volunteers when they're in the club to really focus on their volunteer tasks and not get distracted by behavioral issues that may come up. And we're not talking major emotional meltdowns here. We're talking kids who are trying to learn how to get along with each other If you've been in virtual learning for 2 years, you really don't know how to socialize, you don't know how to share, and you may not be good at following directions. So we're really trying to put some tools in place to really empower these kids to be their best self. And then I think you asked me about our impacts. So it's interesting to note, in our last fiscal year, which was 21-22, we served almost 22,000 youth and teens in our sites. And what I find really interesting from some internal surveys we did, we know that 56% of the families we serve are single head of household, meaning single moms and single dads. That's a huge number. We also know out of all of our parents, 93% have told us that without our services, they would not be able to go to work or maybe go back to school to improve their financial situation. So we know that we're in the community we know we're doing really good work. The other thing that I find interesting is our particular organization serves really underserved communities. We know that 46% of our members are below the federal poverty level, which that's a significant number. We also know that we serve 48% of our members are Hispanic, then followed by white, Caucasian, African American, and then multiracial. So that's, when you think about how Arizona is made up, we're pretty much representing the communities that we serve. The other thing I think is interesting, since we are the Boys and Girls Club, we serve 54% males and the rest are females, which is interesting. I work with our original alumni group on occasion. These were the original members back in 1946. So yes, it's an aging population. And they share stories about what it was like in the club when they were younger and how they used to sneak their sisters in. So girls have always been present in the club. But then in the 1990s, they made it official with the name change. So I just find that sort of fascinating about our history.
That is very interesting. So with such a big footprint, I'm sure you guys utilize a lot of volunteers. How many volunteers do you use per year, or do you leverage per year, I should say? And then what kind of roles do volunteers fill?
Oh, those are great questions. So it's important when you think about volunteering, especially in the nonprofit sector, it's important to remember that boards of directors are volunteers as well. Sometimes organizations sort of forget that piece. So post-pandemic, we've like gone up a notch each year. Last year we had a little over 1,000. This year I anticipate having, closer to 1,300. The rate we had before the pandemic is we were seeing about 1,900 volunteers a year, which is pretty significant when you consider we have a very small volunteer services team. So I'm always proud of those numbers. When we think about roles, I like to tell people we have 3 types of volunteer opportunities. You can help out in a club as a club volunteer, where you're engaging with kids one-on-one and working in small groups, assisting the staff in delivering programs and services. You can be a special events volunteer. Of course, everyone thinks of the fundraising events and the galas. We actually have quite a diverse type of fundraising events. So we do golf tournaments, we do a gala, we do different types of radioathons and telethons. We did a fishing derby last year. So we're always out looking for new ways to capture. We've done car raffles. So and all of these require some volunteer support. We have a really solid professional team, both in the clubs and our administrative center, really top professional people. But still, there are things that if you bring a volunteer in, it enables you to do even more yourself.
And I'm going to throw you on the spot a little bit, but do you find that a lot of the volunteers have been impacted by Boys and Girls Clubs in the past? Is
Oh, that
that
is
like a
such a
motivation
Yeah,
to
that is
volunteer?
such a fun question. The alumni do come home and volunteer, and I love when a club kid comes back because they know the program. They are our best walking commercial. But what I generally find our biggest core demographic for volunteering happens to be college students and adult learners. And I find that they are truly motivated to serve. The fact that they're getting a grade is not their motivator most of the time. Most of the time, they really want to get into the club and engage with kids. And really want to give back to their community. I hear that a lot. Our second largest cohort are community members, professionals who now have time and space in their busy lives to give back, and they really want to work with kids. And we have a well-known brand that helps a lot. And so if folks in our area know, if you want to tutor kids or be a mentor, call the Boys and Girls Club. We have opportunities that we can help meet those needs.
So as far as volunteer management, we'll jump into volunteer management a little bit. What was the process like for managing volunteers before VolunteerHub?
Oh my gosh, very archaic. We relied a lot on Excel spreadsheets, handwritten lists, index cards, business cards, filing cabinets with files that were never really as current as I needed them to be. It was just a lot of paper. I often felt like I was drowning in paper. And it was really difficult to gather the monthly data because we're working off handwritten reports. And not everyone writes really clearly, and then there's folks who you can't read their name at all, and you're putting them in the anonymous bucket. So it was very labor intensive, and it was difficult to produce anything quickly. It usually took a good 3 to 4 weeks to put the year-end report together, and it was just took a lot of time.
And what's been your experience with VolunteerHub since you implemented it? What are your favorite features? What do you find the support experience like, client success? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Oh, those are good questions. Hopefully I can remember them all. If not, you can prompt me. So I have to tell you, what I love most about Volunteer Hub is it's incredibly user-friendly, and not just on the volunteer side, but on the staff side. It's very easy to learn. The knowledge community is great. The online helps are great. The staff is responsive. So I really enjoy all of that. What I really appreciate most is how it has simplified data gathering and data reporting. So we're able to pull together data and run reports when we need them. Whereas before, I was in my head like, well, I could do that at the end of the month. I can't do that right now. So it frees up my time a little bit, makes it easier for the staff to submit the data that we need. It also makes event management incredibly streamlined. I like the feature when volunteers can use their smartphone and scan the QR code for the day and automatically get checked in. That just makes everything so much easier. They don't have to stop and fill out papers. They don't have to stop and sign in. They can just scan the QR code and they're ready to go. So I love, of all the features in Volunteer Hub, I got to tell you, that's the one I truly love the most. And that's the one I'm always, I don't want to say harping at the staff, but always reminding staff to please print off the QR code and have that ready to go, because we train the volunteers in orientation to look for the QR code and scan it with their phone. So we try to build that behavior right in at the get-go. We learned early on the best way to get volunteers to use this was to train them to use it in orientation and set an expectation. If you don't see the QR code, ask for the QR code. If you're not sure what your schedule is, send volunteer services an email and we can work it out with you together. But in a perfect world, when everything aligns the way we want it to, the volunteer can access their own account on their phone from anywhere, look at their schedule, sign up for other volunteer opportunities, or if they need to cancel, they can do that on their phone. So, and everybody lives on their phone these days. So I think the fact that you can access it through your phone, especially with the younger Gen Zers, this is like, they're digital natives. This is just natural for them.
I wanted to shift gears a little bit and just talk about the return on investment from volunteer management software. So, what's your thoughts on calculating that?
I just love this question. I do teach part-time at Arizona State University at a graduate level, and we touch on return on volunteer investment. And that's one of the assignments for the students, is to pick a nonprofit and get the data you need and calculate this. And return on investment is important because you need to be able to demonstrate to your board and senior leadership that the resources you're putting into your volunteer program aren't wasted and it's not going into a void or a black hole. There's an actual return. So for every $1 they invest in volunteer engagement, you should be seeing a return of $4 or $5, possibly higher. And the best way to get that calculation is to have solid data on the number of volunteers you engage and the number of hours they're putting in. And so VolunteerHub makes it super easy to track that. And regardless of how you set up user groups and event groups, it's just really easy to run the reports you need and get those numbers and do that calculation. It's way easier now than it was before I had VolunteerHub to help me. So we are a service enterprise organization, so that standard of excellence is administered between Points of Light and the Alive organization. And figuring out your return on investment is one of the requirements for being a service enterprise organization. And the first time I calculated it, I didn't have VolunteerHub, and it took over a month to get all the data I needed, including how many volunteers I had and how many hours they had put in. Now that we have VolunteerHub, it's a lot simpler to know my numbers. And that's keeping in mind the adage that your data is only as good as the data you put into it, right? So there is a human component there that you kind of have to stay on top of, but it's just way easier. And I think for folks new to the field of volunteer engagement or volunteer management, if you're not familiar with return on investment, there's different ways to calculate it, but there is one that's pretty much a standard. There's a number of things you can go, if you just Google return on volunteer investment, things pop up. So I would encourage folks that aren't used to this calculation or aren't familiar with it to kind of do some reading on it, because it is an excellent way to communicate to your board the value of the volunteer program. But more importantly, it helps you demonstrate the value of an investment like VolunteerHub. And at the end of the day, we want to know that how we're investing our resources matters. And the best way to do that is to use that calculation, in my opinion.
I really appreciate you, taking the time to talk to me and kind of go through not just the value your organization's finding from VolunteerHub, but also telling us more about Boys and Girls Clubs of the Valley, and then also talking about the return on investment. To close things out, if I want to volunteer with Boys and Girls Club of the Valley, what's the process like? I know you and I both know, but can you kind of tell people who may be listening that want to volunteer for your organization how they can do so?
It's really easy, and VolunteerHub makes it super easy because I use that as my online engagement platform. So when the pandemic hit, we did away with papers. And now if you want to volunteer, you go to our website, you find the how to support, and there's a go through the page and you'll find a button. It's volunteer. You click on that. It actually directs you right to our landing page for VolunteerHub, and it starts to guide you through the placement process by answering a series of questions. And then once someone has initiated the placement process by doing VolunteerHub, their next step is to complete our required background check, do a volunteer interview at the location where they're going to volunteer, and then we close it out with a volunteer orientation. Depending on the placement, that orientation may look a little different. So if you are doing a program that requires specific training, we build that into the orientation. If you are a student and you've got to meet certain academic requirements, that orientation is going to look a little bit different. And if you're supporting events, it's going to look different again. But everyone gets an orientation. Everyone leaves knowing what our mission, vision, and values are. Everyone leaves knowing how they're going to impact the organization.
If you're in Arizona and you want to find a good cause or find a good organization to volunteer with, go check out Boys and Girls Club of the Valley and volunteer today.